When the HOA president slipped a 72-hour eviction notice into his mailbox, Derek Whitfield had two choices: walk away quietly or fight back. What he found buried in old lease agreements would leave an entire neighborhood stunned. Imagine buying the piece of land you've worked your entire life to afford. The soil feels right beneath your boots, the view stretches wide with mountains in the distance, and for the first time in years, you feel like you're finally home. That was exactly what Derek Whitfield, a 42-year-old rancher, thought when he closed on his property just outside Grand Junction, Colorado. He wasn't looking for trouble, just peace. But trouble came anyway, delivered in the form of a neatly folded letter tucked inside his mailbox. It wasn't a welcome card. It wasn't a neighbor stopping by to say hello. It was an ultimatum. The letter was on official Homeowners Association letterhead, signed by none other than Marjorie Klein, the HOA president. It gave Derek 72 hours, 3 days, to sell his ranch or face penalties. The reason? According to Marjorie, his fencing didn't align with the community's standards, and his livestock, 3 horses and a small group of cattle, were inappropriate for the aesthetic of the neighborhood. Derek stood at the end of his gravel driveway, reading those words over and over again. His fingers clenched the page tighter with each sentence. Sell the ranch or face penalties. The demand was absurd. He had done his research before buying the land. It was zoned for agricultural use. Every paper was filed correctly, every regulation followed. This wasn't a mistake. This was a challenge. Inside his modest ranch house, he tossed the letter on the kitchen table. His wife, Cynthia, noticed his silence. "What's wrong?" she asked, sliding the kettle off the stove. Derek pushed the letter toward her. "Read this." Her eyes scanned the page, her lips tightening as she reached the signature line. 72 hours? Who does she think she is? "The president of this HOA," Derek muttered. "But she doesn't own me." Cynthia sat down across from him. "So what are you going to do?" Derek didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared out the window at his land, the acres of pasture he had poured his savings into, the fence he had repaired with his own hands, the stables that smelled of hay and honest work. The thought of losing all of it, not because of law or debt, but because of one person's arrogance, filled him with a heat he hadn't felt in years. Later that evening, Derek decided to pay Marjorie a visit. Her house wasn't hard to find. It was the largest one on the block, with perfectly trimmed hedges and a porch lined with identical flower pots, like a showroom display. He knocked firmly on the door. Marjorie opened it herself. She was in her late 50s, with a rigid posture and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, as if she had been expecting him. "You want to explain this?" Derek held up the letter. Her smile faltered for a second before she straightened her shoulders. "It's quite clear, isn't it? Your property doesn't comply with the community's vision. You'll need to make other arrangements." "My property is zoned for ranching," Derek replied, his voice steady. "The county approved it. Every legal document is in order." Marjorie tilted her head slightly. "Sometimes what's legal isn't what's best for everyone." That sentence landed like a rock in Derek's chest. He understood exactly what she meant. This wasn't about fences or livestock. This was about control. "I'm not selling," Derek said firmly. Marjorie's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then you'll face consequences. The board stands with me." Derek took a step closer, locking eyes with her. "We'll see about that." He turned and walked away, the letter still crumpled in his fist. His boots crunched against the gravel as he headed back to his truck. The air felt heavy, not because of the weather, but because he knew this was just the beginning. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Derek lay awake, replaying the encounter in his mind. The arrogance in Marjorie's tone, the certainty in her voice. It gnawed at him. Cynthia reached for his hand in the dark. "You can't let her win," she whispered. "I won't," he replied. The ranch was his dream. He had fought too long and too hard to let someone like Marjorie Klein dictate his future. But deep down, he knew this wasn't going to be a simple disagreement. This was going to be a battle. But if there's one thing Derek didn't know yet, it was just how many of his neighbors had already felt Marjorie's iron grip and how far she was willing to go to keep control. The next morning, Derek was up before sunrise. He had chores to do, horses to feed, stalls to clean, water troughs to refill. But his mind wasn't on the work. His muscles went through the motions, but his thoughts circled back to that conversation at Marjorie's door. Her tone wasn't just strict, it was threatening. And that smug line, "Sometimes what's legal isn't what's best for everyone," echoed in his head like a warning shot. By noon, he had decided he wouldn't wait for her penalties to arrive. He was going to face her and the board head-on. Cynthia watched him pulling on his boots at the door. "Where are you going?" "To the HOA meeting," Derek said flatly. She shook her head. "Be careful, Derek. You know she's not going to back down." He gave her a quick nod. "Neither am I." The meeting was held at the community center, a building that sat right at the edge of Derek's property line. Ironically, part of the parking lot spilled onto land he now owned, though most residents didn't know it yet. As Derek walked in, conversations stopped. Eyes followed him. Some were curious, some sympathetic, others wary, as if he had already been labeled the outsider. Marjorie sat at the head of a long table, flanked by 3 board members. She greeted him with a tight smile. "Mr. Whitfield, we weren't expecting you." "Well, I got your letter," Derek said, taking a seat directly across from her. "So here I am." One of the board members, a balding man with wire-frame glasses, cleared his throat. "We need to maintain order, sir. This isn't the time for individual grievances. It's exactly the time." Derek cut him off. "You gave me 72 hours to sell my property. I want to know who gave you the right to demand that." Marjorie folded her hands neatly on the table. "The board and I are responsible for upholding the community's values. Your fencing and livestock, while perhaps acceptable elsewhere, don't align with our standards. It creates an image problem." "An image problem?" Derek repeated, his voice low but steady. "You mean my ranch doesn't look like your magazine-cut lawns and your copy-paste flower beds? That's not an image problem. That's you trying to erase anything that doesn't look the way you want it to." A hush fell over the room. Some residents exchanged glances but said nothing. Marjorie's smile thinned. "You can interpret it however you'd like, but the board has the authority to fine you daily until you comply." Derek leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "Fine me for what? Owning livestock on agriculturally zoned land? Fixing my fences with my own 2 hands? You're not above the law, Marjorie." Her jaw tightened. "This isn't about the law. It's about harmony. If you truly cared about fitting in, you'd make adjustments." Derek let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "Harmony? I've been here 3 weeks, and not once have you asked me about my family, my work, or my plans for this place. The only harmony you care about is the kind you can control." For the first time, Marjorie's composure cracked. Her cheeks flushed. She reached for her gavel, tapping it against the table. "This discussion is over." Derek stood slowly. "No, it's just beginning." As he turned to leave, he caught sight of a few neighbors in the back row, 2 women whispering to each other, a man nodding slightly in quiet agreement. They weren't bold enough to speak up, but their eyes said everything. They'd seen this before. Outside, the late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the parking lot. Derek took a deep breath, the air dry against his throat. He wasn't sure yet how he'd fight back, but one thing was clear. Marjorie had picked the wrong man to push around. Back at the ranch, Cynthia was waiting on the porch. "How bad was it?" she asked as he climbed the steps. "She tried to shut me down in front of everyone," Derek said, sinking into the porch chair. "But I saw it in their faces. People are tired of her. They just don't know how to fight back." Cynthia studied him for a moment. "So what's your next move?" "I'm going to find out exactly how much power she really has," Derek answered. "And then I'll make sure she never uses it against us again." But what Derek didn't realize was that the whispers among neighbors would soon reach him directly. And the stories they carried about Marjorie's past tactics were darker than he could have imagined. 2 days after the HOA meeting, Derek noticed something different when he drove into town for supplies. At the feed store in Clifton, a man stocking bags of grain paused when he saw him. "You're the new rancher out by Mesa Park, right?" "That's me," Derek said, adjusting his cap. The man leaned closer, lowering his voice. Marjorie already after you? Derek froze for a second. How'd you know? The man chuckled bitterly. She's got a pattern. New folks move in, especially if they don't fit her little picture-perfect world. And suddenly they're breaking some rules she made up last week. You're not the first. That conversation stuck with him all the way home. Later that evening, as he repaired a section of fencing near the community center, a neighbor approached, an older woman named Frances Doyle, with silver hair pulled into a bun and hands that looked like they'd worked hard for decades. I saw what happened at the meeting, she said quietly, glancing around as if checking who might overhear. You stood your ground. That takes guts, Derek shrugged. Doesn't feel like it changed anything. Oh, it did, Frances replied. You have no idea how many of us have been waiting for someone to finally stand up to her. She's been running this HOA like it's her personal kingdom. Last year she tried to fine a family for having too many cars in their driveway, even though the bylaws didn't say a word about it. Derek frowned. And nobody pushed back. People tried, but she wears folks down, threatens them with endless fines. Some just sell and leave rather than deal with her. Frances's eyes softened. You're different. I can tell. A couple of days later, another neighbor, Owen Castillo, stopped by while Derek was moving hay bales into the barn. Owen, in his mid-30s, carried himself with the kind of weariness that comes from too many long shifts. You're Derek, right? He asked. Yeah, Derek said, brushing dirt off his gloves. What can I do for you? Owen looked over his shoulder before stepping closer. I heard Marjorie sent you a letter. She did, Derek replied. She pulled the same stunt on me 2 years back. Said my shed was too tall, threatened to fine me every day until I tore it down. I ended up caving because I couldn't afford the fight, lost thousands in materials. Derek's jaw clenched. She's been getting away with this for years? Owen nodded. She knows most people don't have the stomach for legal battles. She's counting on you giving up, just like the rest of us. That night, Derek and Cynthia sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out between them. Deeds, zoning approvals, every document tied to the ranch. Cynthia leaned forward, her brow furrowed. They've been letting her run unchecked, she said. But you've got something they didn't have. What's that? Derek asked. Evidence. You've already spotted inconsistencies. If she's been this reckless with others, there's a trail somewhere. Derek thought about the community center, the parking lot that stretched across the line of his property. He remembered the first time he walked the land with the realtor, noticing that part of it had been paved. He hadn't thought much of it then. Now it gnawed at him. I need to check county records again, he said slowly. There's something she doesn't want me to see. The next day, Derek visited the county clerk's office. He spent hours flipping through property maps and lease agreements. The clerks didn't bat an eye. They'd seen plenty of landowners digging into records before. But what Derek found made him sit back in his chair. There, in black and white, was proof. The HOA had been leasing part of his land, the very lot where the community center sat, for years. The previous owner had agreed to it, but now that he owned the ranch, those terms had to go through him. The HOA had no automatic claim. He made copies, tucking them into a folder. Driving home, the weight of the papers beside him, Derek felt something he hadn't felt since the letter first arrived. Control. When he pulled into his driveway, Cynthia met him at the door. Well? She asked. Derek handed her the folder. She thinks she's the only one holding the cards. She's wrong. But before Derek made his next move, he knew he had to confront Marjorie again. This time not with words, but with proof that could bring her entire operation to its knees. The folder sat on the kitchen table like a loaded weapon. Derek flipped it open again, spreading the copies across the wood grain as if arranging puzzle pieces. Cynthia leaned over his shoulder, scanning the highlighted sections. It's right here, she said, tapping the paper. The HOA's lease expired with the last owner. They never renegotiated. They're using your land without permission. Derek nodded slowly. And charging residents for access, which means they're pocketing money off something they don't even have the right to use. The discovery lit a fire in him, but it also raised questions. How much had they made? How many years had this been going on? And who else knew? That night, instead of turning in, Derek stayed up late with a pot of coffee and a yellow notepad. He combed through the bylaws, cross-referencing them with county zoning laws and land use codes. Each line he read painted a clearer picture of Marjorie's tactics, rules stretched beyond their meaning, penalties enforced without proper process, and residents too tired or scared to fight back. Cynthia watched from the doorway. "You're in deep now," she said softly. Derek didn't look up. "If I don't take this seriously, she'll steamroll us. I'm not giving her the satisfaction." By morning, his eyes were bloodshot, but his notes were stacked thick. He'd found loopholes in the HOA bylaws big enough to drive a truck through. He was ready to use them. Later that day, he stopped at the hardware store in Palisade. As he was checking out, Frances Doyle appeared again, her arms full of gardening supplies. "You've been busy," she remarked. "Doing homework," Derek replied. She gave him a knowing smile. "You found something, didn't you?" "More than something," he said. "They've been leasing part of my land without rights." Frances's eyebrows shot up. "Well, that explains a lot. People always wondered how Marjorie could fund all her little projects, new flower beds, extra signage, even that ridiculous fountain by the center." Derek narrowed his eyes. "Residents pay dues for that, don't they?" "They do," Frances said. "But she's never been transparent about where all the money goes. You may have just found the crack in her armor." Back at the ranch, Derek picked up the phone and called Owen. "You told me she forced you to tear down your shed. What if I told you the HOA's been squatting on my land this whole time?" There was a pause on the line. Then Owen laughed bitterly. "I knew she was crooked. I just didn't have proof. If you can show that to the community, she won't be able to hide." Derek hesitated. "I want to, but she's not going to take this lying down. She'll fight harder the closer she gets to losing control. Then hit her fast," Owen advised. "She counts on dragging people out until they quit. Don't give her that chance." That evening, Derek and Cynthia walked the property line together. The gravel from the community center parking lot spilled a good 10 feet over the survey markers. Derek crouched down, running his hand over the boundary stake. "This is ours," he said firmly. "They've paved right over it. And if they're using my land, they're paying for it." Cynthia's eyes lit up. "You're going to rewrite the lease." "Exactly," Derek replied. "And when they see the new terms, they'll realize this game is over." But before he could serve the papers, he wanted to make sure his case was airtight. The next morning, he drove to the Mesa County Recorder's office and requested certified copies of every relevant document: property deeds, zoning maps, lease agreements. He even asked for HOA filings, digging through public records until his fingers were smudged with ink from the photocopies. As he stacked the papers into a binder, a clerk glanced at the growing pile. "Looks like you're about to stir something up." Derek smiled grimly. "You have no idea." That night, back at the kitchen table, he rehearsed what he'd say to Marjorie. He pictured her smug expression, the way she leaned on the board as if they were her personal bodyguards. This time, he wouldn't walk into that room with just words. He'd walk in with proof. Cynthia placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not just fighting for us, you know. You're fighting for everyone she's pushed around." Derek nodded. "And I plan on winning." But the moment he confronted Marjorie with the truth, the battle lines would be drawn sharper than ever before, and neither of them would walk away unchanged. The HOA scheduled its monthly meeting for a Thursday evening, and Derek knew this was his moment. He arrived early, binder under his arm, wearing a clean button-down shirt and boots that still carried the dust of his land. The community center buzzed with conversation, neighbors filing in, some carrying coffee cups, others clutching notes. Derek noticed more faces turning toward him than before. Some nodded politely, others whispered behind cupped hands. At the front, Marjorie sat tall, her usual fixed smile in place. She tapped her pen against the table as the board members shuffled their papers. The moment Derek stepped forward, her eyes narrowed. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, voice dripping with mock cordiality. "I didn't see your name on the agenda." "You will now," Derek answered, pulling out a chair and setting his binder on the table with a firm thud. The sound cut through the murmurs in the room. Marjorie's smile wavered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered. "We're here to discuss landscaping guidelines and dues increases, not personal disputes." Derek flipped the binder open, sliding out the certified documents. This isn't personal. It's about the HOA leasing land it doesn't own. The room grew still. A man in the second row leaned forward, eyes widening. Marjorie's hands tightened around her pen. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Derek said, raising the papers so the board could see. "The community center and part of this parking lot sit on my property. That lease expired when the previous owner sold me the ranch. You've been trespassing. Worse, you've been collecting money from residents for access without legal right." Gasps rippled across the rows. Francis Doyle, sitting near the aisle, let out a low whistle. One of the board members, a woman with neatly pressed slacks, leaned forward nervously. "Is that true, Marjorie?" Marjorie didn't answer right away. She adjusted her glasses, then spoke in a measured tone. "The arrangement has been in place for years. Mr. Whitfield is simply misinterpreting the documents." Derek slapped down another sheet, the county's certified seal visible under the fluorescent lights. "There's no misinterpretation. Here's the deed. Here's the zoning approval. And here's the lease agreement, terminated at the sale. You're not entitled to this land." Owen Castillo, sitting in the back, called out, "So all those fines and dues increases we've been paying, where's the money going, Marjorie?" More murmurs spread. People shifted in their seats, craning their necks to hear. Marjorie's composure cracked. Her cheeks flushed as she raised her voice. "This is not the place for wild accusations." "It's the perfect place," Derek shot back. "You threatened me with penalties. You told me to sell my land in 72 hours. But the truth is, you've been the one breaking rules." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, the man with glasses from before, finally spoke. "We should review this properly. If what he's saying is accurate, the board has been operating under false assumptions." "That's nonsense!" Marjorie snapped. "He's twisting this to make himself look like a victim." Derek's voice dropped, calm but cutting. "You can spin it however you want. But from this moment on, if the HOA wants to keep using that land, you'll have to deal with me directly. And the terms won't be what you're used to." Silence blanketed the room. Neighbors shifted uneasily, realizing the ground had shifted beneath Marjorie's feet. Marjorie slammed her gavel down. "This meeting is adjourned!" But people didn't rise immediately. Some lingered, whispering. Francis caught Derek's eye and gave him a small, approving nod. Owen stood by the door, waiting until Derek approached. "You hit her where it hurts," Owen said quietly. "She's not done," Derek replied. "That woman's too stubborn to walk away. But now she knows I'm not bluffing." Back home, Derek spread the papers across the table again. Cynthia sat opposite, her eyes shining with pride. "You handled yourself better than most men would under that pressure." Derek shook his head. "It's just the first shot. She'll come back harder." Cynthia leaned forward. "Then you'd better be ready to finish what you started." But Derek didn't realize that Marjorie was already scheming her counterattack, and the next move she made would drag the entire neighborhood into the conflict. The night after the meeting, Derek barely touched his dinner. His mind kept replaying Marjorie's expression when he laid the documents on the table. Shock, anger, panic. He knew he'd hit a nerve, but he also knew she wasn't the type to retreat quietly. Cynthia cleared the plates and set a cup of coffee in front of him. "She'll fight back," she said softly. "She's not going to give up her control without making it ugly." "I know," Derek replied, flipping through the binder again. "Which is why I need to make this airtight. If I'm going to rewrite the lease, there can't be a single crack she can slip through." The next morning, he returned to the Mesa County Recorder's office. He wasn't just looking for proof anymore, he was digging for history. Sitting at a long oak table stacked with maps and microfilm records, Derek sifted through years of filings. Each document told part of the story: land transfers, utility easements, HOA amendments. Hours passed, but then, like striking gold, he found it. The lease agreement wasn't just expired, it had been deliberately ignored. The terms were clear. The lease was valid only as long as the property remained under the ownership of the Whitaker family, the previous ranch owners. Once sold, all agreements required renegotiation with the new owner, but the HOA had carried on as if nothing changed. Derek rubbed his temples, muttering under his breath. They knew. The clerk at the counter noticed his frustration. "You all right?" He slid the paper across. "Can you certify this one too?" She skimmed it, then nodded. Sure can. Looks like you've got quite the case building. With certified copies in hand, Derek left the office with a new sense of clarity. It wasn't just negligence, it was willful overreach. The HOA had been using his land illegally for years, and Marjorie had been the face of it all. That evening, he invited Owen and Francis over. The four of them sat around the kitchen table while Derek spread the documents out like a dealer laying down cards. This, he said, pointing to the clause, is the heart of it. The lease ended the day I bought the ranch. Everything they've done since then, collecting fees, holding meetings in that center, has been without legal right. Owen leaned back, letting out a low whistle. She's going to choke on this when you hand it to her. Francis studied the page, her lips pressed together. She'll deny it at first. She'll say you're misinterpreting again. But with this, she can't hide forever. Cynthia poured coffee for everyone. We can't just think about her. We need to think about what happens when the whole neighborhood realizes they've been paying dues for something they had no claim to. Francis nodded. That's when people will turn, not just because they're tired of her bossing them around, but because they'll feel betrayed. Derek leaned forward. And that's when I move. I'm going to draft a new lease. If they want to keep using my land, they'll pay for it. At a fair rate this time. Fair? Owen asked, raising an eyebrow. Fair to me, Derek said with a small smile. Because for years they've been getting it for free. That ends now. Later that night, after Francis and Owen left, Derek sat at his desk, pen in hand. The words flowed easily. He outlined terms that left no wiggle room. Triple the rent, strict deadlines, penalties for non-payment. He wasn't being cruel. He was being firm. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt like he had leverage. The next morning, he printed the lease in duplicate and slipped it into a thick envelope. Cynthia watched him seal it. You're really doing this, she said, half proud, half nervous. I am, Derek replied. She tried to push me out of my home. Now she's going to pay to stay on mine. He drove into town, the envelope resting on the passenger seat. With each mile, his determination hardened. This wasn't just about protecting his ranch anymore. It was about proving that bullies like Marjorie couldn't twist rules and scare people into submission. When he dropped the envelope into the HOA's mailbox, a weight lifted off his shoulders. The terms were clear. The choice was theirs. Either pay or pack up. But Derek underestimated just how vicious Marjorie could become when cornered, and the neighborhood was about to witness her desperation in full force. When Marjorie opened the envelope, she expected another letter of protest, maybe a half-hearted attempt to negotiate. What she didn't expect was a formal lease agreement, drafted with legal precision, demanding payment at triple the old rate. The following Saturday, Derek was out feeding the horses when his phone buzzed. He wiped his hands on his jeans and answered. Mr. Whitfield. Marjorie's voice came sharp through the line. This document you left us, it's absurd. Outrageous. You can't just invent numbers and call it rent. Derek leaned against the fence, squinting at the horizon. It's not invented. It's market rate. If the HOA wants to keep using my land, that's the cost. You're extorting the community, she snapped. No, Derek replied evenly. I'm charging fair rent for land you've been using illegally for years. You've had it cheap. Now you'll pay what it's worth, or move your center somewhere else. There was a long pause, then a hiss of frustration. You'll regret this. The line went dead. Derek slipped the phone back into his pocket, shaking his head. He knew she'd fight, but her threat only confirmed he was hitting where it hurt most. That evening, word spread like wildfire. Neighbors called, texted, even stopped by the ranch. Some were curious, some worried, and a few quietly supportive. Francis showed up first, holding a plate of cornbread as if it were a peace offering. She's furious, Francis said, setting the plate on the counter. Called an emergency meeting tomorrow night. She's going to paint you as the villain. Derek sat at the table, arms crossed. Let her. The documents speak for themselves. She's good at twisting things, Francis warned. People are afraid of her. You need to be ready to speak plain and show them the truth. The next evening, the community center buzzed louder than ever. Chairs filled quickly. Some stood along the walls. The air felt charged, everyone sensing a showdown. Marjorie banged her gavel sharply. We are here to address Mr. Whitfield's outrageous attempt to gouge this community. He has presented a so-called lease demanding payments that would cripple our budget." Murmurs rose from the crowd. A few nodded in agreement, but others looked uneasy. Derek rose slowly, holding his binder. "I didn't create this situation. The lease ended when I bought the ranch. You've been using my land illegally. Here's the proof." He held up the certified copies for all to see. "Every dollar you've paid toward this property since then has been under false pretenses. I'm not gouging you. I'm asking you to pay fairly or leave." A man in the back stood. "Is that true, Marjorie? Did the lease end?" Her face flushed. "The details are complicated." "No, they're not," Owen interjected, stepping forward. "He showed me the papers. It's all right there in black and white." The room erupted into low chatter. Some people demanded answers, others looked betrayed. Marjorie slammed the gavel again, her voice raised. "This is a hostile takeover of our community resources." Derek's tone stayed calm. "No, this is me enforcing the law, something you claimed to care about when you threatened to fine me. You don't get to pick and choose when rules apply." Francis spoke up from the aisle. "He's right. We've all watched you twist the rules against us for years. This time you can't." For the first time, Marjorie's composure faltered in front of everyone. Her voice shook as she tried to regain control. "If we pay this rent, dues will skyrocket. Families will suffer." "And whose fault is that?" Derek asked, his voice steady. "The man who bought land fair and square, or the leader who kept everyone in the dark while overstepping her authority?" Silence fell. People looked at each other, some nodding grimly. The tide was shifting. That night, as Derek drove home, Cynthia reached across the truck's cab and squeezed his hand. "You turned the tables," she said quietly. He nodded, eyes on the dark road ahead. "But it's not over. She won't go down without a fight." But Marjorie's fight wasn't just about power anymore. It was about survival, and her desperation was about to drag the neighborhood into chaos. The morning after the fiery meeting, Derek noticed something different as he drove into town. People no longer avoided his gaze. At the gas station, a man at the next pump gave him a nod of respect. At the grocery store, a young mother whispered to her friend, "That's the rancher who stood up to Marjorie." It wasn't celebrity, but it was recognition. Acknowledgement that he had dared to do what no one else had. Back at the ranch, though, the atmosphere was more complicated. Cynthia stood by the window, arms folded. "Half the neighborhood is rallying behind you," she said, "but the other half is scared. They're worried you're going to bankrupt the HOA." "They should be worried about Marjorie, not me," Derek replied, tossing his gloves onto the counter. "She's the one who created this mess." That afternoon, Owen dropped by, carrying a folder under his arm. "You won't believe this," he said, setting it on the table. Inside were years of HOA newsletters and financial statements. "I dug these out of my garage. Look at the dues increases, steady year after year, but no clear accounting of where the extra money went." Derek flipped through the pages, frowning. "She's been padding the budget, and nobody questioned it?" "People grumbled," Owen said, "but she always blamed rising costs. No one had the stomach to fight her." Frances showed up later that evening, bringing pie as if to soften the conversation. She set the dish down with a sigh. "Word is spreading fast. Some folks are saying you're saving the community from her. Others are saying you're tearing it apart." Cynthia poured coffee for everyone, her expression tight. "What do you think, Frances?" "I think the truth scares people," Frances said plainly. "But once it sinks in, they'll realize you're not the villain here." By the end of the week, tensions boiled over. A group of residents knocked on Derek's door, 4 families all at once. The leader, a man named Brian Kessler, spoke first. "We don't want to take sides, Derek, but our kids play at that center. Our events are held there. If the HOA can't pay your rent, we all lose." Derek leaned against the doorframe. "I'm not shutting it down. I'm offering them a legal lease. It's Marjorie who's refusing to accept reality." One of the women stepped forward, her voice trembling. "She told us you're trying to bleed us dry, that if we give in, she'll have to double dues." "Did she tell you she's been collecting money illegally for years?" Derek asked, pulling out a copy of the certified lease. He held it up. This is the truth. I'm not the one who lied to you. The families exchanged uneasy glances. Brian lowered his voice. If you can prove it to everyone, you'll have support. But until then, she still holds sway. After they left, Derek sank into the porch chair, rubbing his temples. Cynthia sat beside him. She's poisoning the well, she said. Yeah, Derek muttered. And the only cure is transparency. The following week, Derek requested a special meeting, not through Marjorie, but directly with the residents. He rented a hall in town, neutral ground. Flyers went out, spread quietly by Francis and Owen. On the night of the gathering, more than 50 people showed up, curiosity and frustration etched across their faces. Derek stood at the front, the binder open on a podium. I'm not here to fight with anyone. I'm here to show you the truth. He laid out the documents one by one, explaining in plain language how the lease had expired, how the HOA had continued illegally, and how Marjorie had used it to funnel money without accountability. Gasps filled the room. A few shook their heads in disbelief. Others muttered angrily. One man shouted, "She lied to us!" Frances stood up, her voice carrying. He's not the enemy. He's the reason you're finally hearing the truth. By the end of the night, the room was split, but the crack in Marjorie's armor was widening. For every skeptic, there were 2 more who started to question her rule. When Derek walked out of the hall, Owen clapped him on the back. You've turned the tide, he said. Maybe, Derek replied, staring at the darkened parking lot. But tides crash hard before they settle. But while Derek gained ground with the community, Marjorie was unraveling in private, and her desperation would soon push her past the point of no return. For years, Marjorie Klein had ruled her HOA like a queen. Meetings ended when she said they ended, rules bent when she wanted them bent, and residents whispered her name with equal parts fear and resignation. But now, her power was slipping through her fingers like sand. At first, she tried to put on a front. She showed up to board meetings in crisp suits, her smile as polished as ever. But beneath the surface, cracks were showing. Board members who once echoed her every word now sat silent, flipping through Derek's certified documents with furrowed brows. Neighbors who once avoided her gaze crossed the street without so much as a wave. Late one evening, Marjorie sat in her living room surrounded by stacks of paperwork. Wineglass half empty, she rifled through old leases and meeting minutes, searching for something, anything, that could give her leverage. Her husband, a quiet man named Richard, stood in the doorway. You've been at this for hours, he said gently. They're turning on me, Marjorie muttered, not looking up. That man is making me look like a fool. Richard shifted uneasily. Maybe it's time to step back. You've given so much of yourself to this. Maybe too much. Her head snapped up, eyes blazing. Step back? Do you know what happens if I step back? He wins. And if he wins, they'll forget everything I've built here. Richard sighed, retreating into the kitchen. For years he'd let her obsession consume her. Now it frightened him. The following week, things grew worse. Frances overheard Marjorie in the parking lot, snapping at one of the board members. You're either with me or against me, she hissed. If you side with him, don't expect my support when it's your house under review. The board member, red-faced and flustered, stormed off. Frances relayed the story to Derek the next day. She's losing her grip, Frances said. People are tired of being threatened. Meanwhile, Derek stayed focused. He reinforced his case with more evidence, prepared a revised lease with stricter terms, and kept lines of communication open with neighbors. Each step he took only deepened Marjorie's panic. At the next board meeting, she lost control entirely. Residents filled the room, demanding answers. Derek sat near the back, calm and quiet, letting the scene unfold. Why weren't we told about the lease expiration? One woman demanded. Where did our money go? Another shouted. Marjorie slammed her gavel, shouting over them. Order! This is my meeting and you will respect it! But the words rang hollow. The crowd kept pressing. A man in the front row stood, arms crossed. Your meeting? Or the community's meeting? Because it feels like you've been running this place for yourself. The room erupted in applause. Marjorie's face turned crimson. She tried to retort, but her voice cracked. I've done nothing but serve this neighborhood." "Serve yourself," someone muttered loudly. The gavel clattered against the table, her hand trembling. For the first time, Marjorie Klein looked small, her authority crumbling before everyone's eyes. Derek stayed seated, resisting the urge to gloat. This wasn't about humiliating her. It was about truth coming to light. Still, as he watched her unravel, he realized something important. Bullies don't collapse gracefully. They fight until the bitter end. After the meeting, Owen caught up with Derek in the parking lot. "She's finished," Owen said. "Not yet," Derek replied, glancing back at the building. Through the window, Marjorie sat slumped in her chair, staring blankly at the papers in front of her. "She's desperate, and desperate people make dangerous choices." That night, as Derek walked his property under the fading sunset, Cynthia joined him. "She's breaking," Cynthia said softly. "Yeah," Derek replied, "but the question is, what's she going to do with the little power she's got left?" But Marjorie wasn't done yet. With her reputation collapsing and the community slipping through her fingers, she was about to make one last reckless move, forcing Derek to bring the battle to its final conclusion. The final confrontation didn't happen at a board meeting or in a courtroom. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning when Derek received a knock at his door. Cynthia was in the kitchen, but Derek answered. Standing there, holding a thick envelope, was Marjorie herself. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her eyes bloodshot. The polished, commanding presence was gone. She extended the envelope with a trembling hand. "What's this?" Derek asked. Her voice was hoarse. "The board voted last night. We're accepting the new lease." Derek raised his eyebrows, surprised she'd deliver the news herself. He took the envelope, glancing at the signatures inside. Every board member had signed off. Marjorie's name was the last, scribbled hastily. "You fought hard to stop this," Derek said quietly. Her jaw tightened. "I fought because I thought I knew what was best. But they don't trust me anymore. You took that from me." Derek shook his head. "No, Marjorie, you did that to yourself." For a moment, she looked like she might lash out again. But then her shoulders slumped. Without another word, she turned and walked down the gravel driveway, her heels crunching against the stones. Cynthia stepped onto the porch, watching her leave. That looked like surrender. "Maybe not surrender," Derek replied, slipping the envelope under his arm. "But admission." Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood shifted. The HOA sent notices to all residents explaining the new lease terms. Dues rose slightly, but for the first time in years, the budget was transparent. People began holding the board accountable, asking questions instead of staying silent. Some even thanked Derek in person, at the grocery store, at the feed store, even while passing by his ranch. Frances visited one afternoon, leaning against the porch railing with a smile. "You've done something no one thought possible," she said. "You broke her grip." Derek sipped his coffee. "I didn't do it alone. People just needed someone to push back first," Frances nodded. "Sometimes that's all it takes. One person brave enough to stand up." Not everyone was happy, of course. A few grumbled about the higher dues, blaming Derek. But most saw the truth now. Marjorie had manipulated them for years, and Derek's stand had forced honesty back into the system. Marjorie herself faded from public view. She stopped attending board meetings, eventually resigning her position. Rumors swirled. Some said she and Richard were planning to move. Others whispered she couldn't face the shame. For Derek, it didn't matter anymore. The fight was over. One evening, Derek and Cynthia sat on the porch, the sun dipping behind the mesas. The ranch stretched before them, quiet except for the gentle rustle of the horses in the pasture. "You know," Cynthia said, resting her hand on his, "most people would have given up after that first letter." Derek looked out at the land. "Yeah, that's how bullies win. They count on people folding under pressure. But this place, I worked too hard for it. I wasn't about to let anyone take it from us." She smiled. "And now the whole neighborhood knows it." Derek took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past weeks lift. The battles, the sleepless nights, the constant tension, it all led to this moment of peace. The lesson was simple yet powerful. Standing your ground wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And sometimes the fight wasn't just for yourself. It was for everyone too afraid to speak up. As the sky turned shades of orange and purple, Derek thought about the neighbors who had thanked him, the ones who now felt free to question authority. Maybe they'd never fully understand what it cost him, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that they'd never be afraid of Marjorie again. He turned to Cynthia with a small smile. "You know what the best part is?" "What?" she asked. "I didn't just save our ranch. I made sure nobody else will have to go through what we did." Cynthia squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening. "That's worth more than any lease." And with that, the long fight was finally behind them. If this story taught you something, let it be this. Never underestimate the power of standing firm when someone tries to push you around. Know your rights, protect what's yours, and don't let intimidation decide your future. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more, because the battles worth hearing are the ones that show us what real strength looks like.